Okay, in our last session, what we talked about was we began to look at the four things you need to do in order to overcome your fear of failure. The first thing you have to do is realize there's two types of fear, right? There's good fear, bad fear. Good fear makes you wise. It lets you see what boundaries you cannot cross without danger, without horrible risks, without injury. So that's good fear. Bad fear, and that's what we want to overcome. Bad fear is that which keeps you from doing good things, from taking risks when the risks should be taken, and so on. And so we identified that. The second thing we talked about were subconscious or subtle fears and how to detect those, because if you don't detect them, you don't deal with them. And of course, the first thing you do, what do I really want? The second thing is what obstacles stand in my way? And last but not least, what keeps me from confronting those obstacles? Number three, and that's where we are now. You've now identified a fear. We'll say that you are afraid to confront your significant other on an issue that you really think if you could resolve that issue, your relationship could really grow, be much more fulfilling and satisfying. Or on the job, you see something that could really be beneficial to your department's goals, could help your company make more money and consequently give you a nice bonus or a raise. If you're an entrepreneur, it's a way to win on a project. But you're afraid to try. Okay, you've identified the subtle fears, you've identified the obvious fears, but you're afraid to confront that. What do you do? Okay, what was taught to me, and this was taught to me once again by my mentor, Gary Smalley, to whom I owe almost every piece of wisdom in my life. Him, the Proverbs, and the Bible, and a couple mentors besides Gary. So, what do we do with fear? We want to put it in its proper perspective. Okay, so fear may be this, the thing we fear in reality may be this high, but we may see it as this high. So we don't even confront it. But when we are able to put it in its proper perspective and see it's really only 2 inches high instead of 7 inches high, well, this is manageable. But what brings it from here to here? That's what we're going to look at right now. So I used to draw a chart, and it's real simple. We have a PDF on it, and it is, you write down the fear. That's column 1. Column 1, fear. Column 2, worst case. If you try to do what you're afraid to do, what's the worst thing that can happen? And you write that out. Column next to that is best case. What's the best thing that could happen? And column number 3 is the likely case. There was a time when I was on job number 3. Most of you might remember I flunked out of 9 jobs in my first 6 years. You know what? By the time I failed in my 9th job, actually I didn't fail in the 9th job. By the time I failed in, we'll say, job number 5, I wasn't afraid of failing anymore because I had failed so many times on so many projects. It never killed me. It never stopped me from eating or sleeping, or I never lost my home, thankfully. But I stopped being afraid. When I met with Steven Spielberg, it was the first time we met since we graduated high school, and we started looking at the things we had in common because he had achieved his impossible dreams. I had achieved mine. This was 18 years after we had graduated high school. And do you know, fear of failure was one of the things we talked about? Both of us had failed so many times in little things that we stopped being afraid of failure. And consequently, we were able to shoot for the moon and go after things that there's no way on earth we should have been able to accomplish, but we did through effective partnering. And but fear of failure was one of the things we got over pretty early in life. So here we are. On job number 3, I wanted to transfer. I talked to the president of another subsidiary. I was working for one subsidiary of this big corporation, and there was another subsidiary, and I talked to the president of that subsidiary, who was a guy I really liked. His name was Bob Wilcox. And I said, Mr. Wilcox, I think if I were to come to work for you, I could do this, 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 and this, and really help your subsidiary, help your company. And he said, wow, that sounds good to me. I would love to have you transfer. So I said, well, I'm a peon. I can't arrange a transfer. He said, I'll go talk to personnel, and I'll talk to the president of the subsidiary you work for, and we'll see if we can arrange that transfer. So he went and talked, and I was told that I was going to be transferred on Monday. But I needed to talk to my boss first. Well, I was scared to death of my boss, because my boss, man, there was not a lot of flexibility in his life. He was a vice president. He was probably the most respected guy in the whole company, and other than the owner. And I was afraid. So I went ahead, and my fear was that I would be turned down for the transfer. Okay, so when I wrote it out, it was like, worst case, I'll be turned down for the transfer and keep doing what I've been doing, even if I didn't ask for the transfer. So that's the worst case. I'm just going to be stuck here. Maybe he'll make life a little bit worse for me. Best case, I'll get the transfer and start enjoying my work, because I was not enjoying my work under this guy. Likely case, I'll get the transfer, but I'll be shunned by that boss for as long as I work for the company, because all the corporations were in one building. We had 3,500 employees. And so I looked at it, and when I looked at that, okay, worst case, I'll be turned down. Hey, worst case, I'm going to be stuck doing what I'm already stuck doing. So that's not too bad. Best case, I'll get the transfer and really start enjoying work. Likely case, I'll get the transfer and I'll be shunned. Well, I looked at that likely case. Do I care if my boss shuns me and thinks less of me? Nah, not really. I want to enjoy my work. So I got up the nerve, and I went ahead and talked to the boss, and he said, I'll get back to you. Okay. Well, the next day, he had told the entire department he was going to fire me. He calls me into his office. You've already probably heard this story. I think I told it earlier. He had me sit down, and he said, Steve, you're the single greatest disappointment in my entire career. You will never succeed in marketing. You have 20 minutes to clean out your desk. Now, I don't lose it right there, but right as I get up from the sofa that I was sitting on, he says, oh, by the way, personnel tells me that they've got something else for you, working, I think, National Home Life, Mr. Wilcox. And so go see personnel. Well, I go to my desk, but just the humiliation of being fired, the humiliation of cleaning out my desk in front of everybody and them sneaking peeks and me putting everything, that was terrible. So even though I knew I had the transfer, so I started working for Mr. Wilcox the following Monday. And so what did I get? I got the likely case. I got the transfer, and I feel awkward whenever I see my ex-boss, because he did shun me. I did feel a little awkward whenever I saw the employees from that department in the cafeteria. They no longer talked to me. I guess they had been told not to talk to me. But I got the transfer, and I ended up loving the job. I traveled all over the country with my new boss, and he taught me a lot of things. It was absolutely awesome. Okay, why? Because I had laid out what the potentials were. Worst case, best case, likely case. And the worst case wasn't horrible. The best case would be amazing, and the likely case had the potential for being amazing. And it turned into be amazing. So that's how you take anything you're really afraid of. If you were going to do it in a relationship, I one time counseled a woman in our Bible study, and her husband was very condescending to her. He was the smart one in the relationship. She was the dumb one. She was the stupid one. He treated her like she was stupid. And we did this whole thing where we laid out worst case, best case, likely case. And so she was going to confront him, and we worked on the language and good emotional word pictures like we've talked earlier. Worst case was he was just going to keep doing what he's doing, say something stupid, condescending, irrelevant, and her marriage would continue the way it was going already. That's the worst case. Best case is he'd actually hear what she said, and with a good word picture, understand what she's saying and actually feel what she's feeling. That's the best case. Likely case is it would be somewhere between best and worst. And I can't remember what we determined. And so when I'm talking about, okay, you can have anything, we're trying to detect the subtle fear. What do you want? She said, I just want him to stop criticizing me. I said, no, that's too low of a goal. We want to shoot for the moon. I said, let's go higher than that. She said, well, that he would just be nice to me all the time. I said, come on, let's go higher than that. Let's really shoot for the moon. And she gets this little glisten in her eye. I think she was 26 at the time. And she said, he'd treat me like a princess and we'd have a fairy tale marriage. I said, great, that's shooting for the moon. That's the best case. Guess what happened? About 6 months later, she stood up in front of our whole Bible study. There were about 30 of us. Her husband was there. And choking back the tears, she said, I feel like I'm a princess in a Disney movie. I've never felt so loved, so honored, so treasured like I feel now by my husband. And then she looked down at him and she said, you've given me the marriage I always hoped for, but I was afraid that I would never get. Okay? We confronted her fears of failure. We did worst case, best case, likely case. We shot for the moon. Her husband, by the way, all the criticism did stop. All the condescension did stop. That was automatic. He was treating her like she was really worth the person she was. And so this will work in just about any area. And we're going to talk a little bit more on how you can do this and getting rid of fear of failure in our next session.